going to be working on the small wheels for the top tensioner. I already have one set installed in the back. I'm just going to go ahead and document the installation of the small wheels. I already have the 608 bearings installed. You can see those right here. They just press fit in. I already have my shaft, my axle shaft. This is an 8mm axle shaft cut to length. And I also have the flat spots on it for the shaft adapters. So we're just going to go ahead and finish this up. On this particular build, when I'm using the I'm using the 2040 aluminum extrusion for my riser. There's a better picture of it. And one of the things that I noticed is the lower axle assembly fits into the 2040 extrusion fits into the lower axle assembly fairly nice. There's just a very little bit of play, like maybe a millimeter or two, but the upper axle assembly actually has a fair amount of space. It's almost I mean, just looking, it looks like it's about maybe 4 millimeters of space right here. This area right here. So I don't really like that. I'm afraid that without it being snug against the 2040 extrusion, I'm concerned that the weight of the track is going to be pushing down on the outside side of the tensioner axle assembly, and it's going to be causing some stress on this rectangular mounting. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to measure that slot in there, that space, and print a flat rectangular piece of PETG and put it in there just to kind of shore up the pocket that the 2040 goes into. So other than that, there weren't really any issues with the axle assemblies so far. So anyway, the other thing I noticed is that when you tighten up the upper tensioner axle assembly to the 2040 extrusion, it's not necessarily like in line with the lower axle. So in the original Yukon Track Drive plans, there were spacers that you could print to go in between the axle shaft adapter and the bearing. However, those spacers from the Yukon Track Drive, they were about as wide as the outer casing for the bearing. And what that looked like to me is that if you put those spacers on, they would actually ride potentially against this housing for the bearing and that would create a source of friction. So I didn't really understand why you would use a spacer like that. So I went and created my own spacers. The outside diameter is the same diameter of the shaft adapter itself. And then what that allows for is it allows for the edge of the spacer to ride up against the inner race of the bearing. So that should prevent any kind of, it should allow the bearing to do its job for one thing. And we're not going to have any rubbing up against this part right here, up against the housing. So the spacers, when I got my tensioner assembly connected to the 2040 extrusion, I had to put basically a temporary axle through. And then once my temporary axle was in there, I had to line up the face of the inside edge of the medium wheel with the outside edge of this wheel adapter to make sure that when the small wheel is attached, the inside of the small wheel is in line with the inside edge of the medium wheel. That way the track is centered on both the top and the bottom. And then when I had that centered, I basically measured this distance right here with the caliper, or I'm sorry, with the caliper, and this distance right here with the other shaft adapter on and in the position that it needed to be. I went ahead and measured these two spaces and came up with my own spacing. So until I get the track on and run it around, I'm not 100% sure that it's exactly where it needs to be. But again, with the offset created when you attach the tensioner to the 2040 extrusion, it's not necessarily directly in line. It actually does look pretty good, but anyway, I just wanted to make sure that the spacing was correct on both sides so that the track would stay centered as it runs around the top tensioner and back down to the lower tensioner. So that was my process for that. Again, we'll see how it turns out. But so there's actually two different size spacers that I created. My longer spacer is going to go on the inside, and these just press on over the axle. The shorter spacer goes on the outside side, and I need to try and get that centered. So I'm going to go ahead and install the wheel adapters. And the first thing I need to do is make sure that the axle is coming through where it needs to be. And then I'm going to be using these grub screws. Here with just a little bit of Loctite. A little bit of blue Loctite. This tube is getting low. There we go. And then I'm going to feed that in there. Again, you need to make sure that your flat spot is showing through the opening for the grub screw. And then once I have my grub screw started, I just wiggle the axle a little bit just to make sure that the grub screw is actually on the flat spot. If the grub screw was not on the flat spot, you would be able to rotate the axle because it would be riding on, the grub screw would be riding on the outside of the axle, the rounded portion, and when it's just snugged, it would just slip. So you always know when you're on the flat spot when you can't rotate it. Can't rotate the shaft adapter. I'm going to use a grub screw on the other side. And of course I dropped it. No editing on these videos. I don't like to edit videos. It's just a waste of time to some degree for what I'm doing. I'm not trying to do a high production value content here. So now we're going to do the inside. And again, I just need to make sure that it's pushed on all the way. My axle the flat spots on the axle are facing up, so I know that when I put my grub screw in, it's gonna hit the flat spot. A little bit of blue Loctite. And again, I just want to make sure this is on all the way. Going to give it a little wiggle to make sure that the grub screw is on the flat spot. I'm going to tighten that down and do the other side real quick. In case anybody's wondering, why am I building this in my kitchen? That would be because it's really hot out here where I live right now, summertime. And I do not have air conditioning in my garage. So I choose to work in here in the air conditioning, so I'm not overheating. It's just a lot more comfortable. Got a little bit too much Loctite on there, so I'm just going to wipe off the excess. So now I have the wheel adapters on. And all I need to do is finish up by installing the small wheels. using 632 by 1/4 inch button head screws for this. And we're just going to get that started. I'll rotate this around just a little bit. We've already done this process before. It's nothing new. Did the same thing with the medium wheel and the large wheel. So and again, I'm just going to snug these until I get all 4 of them in. That way it allows the wheel to adjust if it needs to, rotation wise. And one more. Now that I have all 4 of the screws started, I'm just going to go ahead and snug them up. I'm actually going to tighten them more than snug. And I'm going to wrap it up here. That's going to be, I need to do the other side, but there's no need to really film that. It's going to be a rinse and repeat for the other side. And that's going to pretty much be it for the bulk of the track drive. I have all my track printed for one side. I'm just waiting for some 4mm stainless steel rod to come in so I can finish connecting all the track. And once I have all the 32 tracks connected, I can go ahead and wrap them around and see if my 2040 extrusion is too tall. I cut the 2040 extrusion riser at 200mm, which is what I saw in the plans. So once I have the track wrapped around the entire assembly, I'll be able to go ahead and check to see if the extrusion is too tall or not. But it's coming along pretty good. I'll keep you posted.